this kind of work.
Judge asked and answered multiple times.
Okay, I'll let him ask it this one more time.
I'm sorry, Your Honor, I couldn't hear what you said.
You can answer the question, sir.
I can answer the question?
Yes.
Okay, what was the question again? Do I have internal standards or?
Yes, what are the internal standards that you apply when you do this kind of work on speaker identification?
That there's a reasonable corpus of speech data to evaluate. That reasonable corpus of data depends on the nature
Reasonable
of the
corpus of
and the
speech.
nature of the task.
Now you
Not something that
must-
you just put a number on.
You do a subjective analysis then to decide whether it's suitable without any particular hard and fast rules. Is that what you're saying?
I'm sure. Why don't you tell me what a hard and fast rule would be? I'll tell you when I adopt it. I'm not clear what you're saying.
A hard and fast rule, for example, might be that no speaker identification should be attempted because it's not reliable if the speech sample is less than 14 seconds long.
I think not such a rule, and that would be overly conservative.
So you would disagree with that standard and you would not apply it in your own work?
I wouldn't apply it as a hard and fast standard, and that would be 14 seconds of speech. Absolutely not the time. It's not based on anything but a committee sitting around deciding that. The research should support that.
Tell me the research that you are thinking of and referring to when you talk about the standards that should be applied for speaker identification work.
That doesn't ring a bell what you're saying. I'm not saying that the research is on standards. I'm saying that the research tells us what kinds of minimal signal qualities we need in order to make identifications. They may not be appropriate for forensic situations, but nonetheless, they tell us. And so, for example, if 1/8 of a second of a nasal, like M, can identify you as a speaker 99.9% of the time, I don't care whether or not you have 14 seconds of speech. All I need is 1/8 of a second. If that's there in the signal.
And when
That's
you
what I'm saying. That's speaker specific and token specific. Speech, sound, and word specific.
When you say in the signal, are you talking about a spectrograph representation?
No, I'm talking about a time with yes and no. Yes, I'm talking about any kind of acoustical measure of speech, whether it's a time waveform measure of speech, a spectrographic measure, a long-term average spectra, short-term spectra, an FFT, whatever.
All right. Let me ask you specifically then, if you don't have specific standards that you can identify to us that you always apply when doing this kind of work, can you identify the standards that you did use in this case regarding the duration of the signal or the nature of the speech itself?
I think that the easiest way to answer that is to say that there are standards for how the experiments are set up. For example, in England and in Florida at the Screw Gates Institute, they have specific ways they set up the listening experiment. I have specific ways that the pair comparisons are set up for both listening and spectrographic analysis. So there are structural things that are standards. If you're talking about specific things about the signal, they don't have some external criterion. Well, it depends. They're interactive variables. And there are many different things that affect speech and speech patterns, and they aren't always predictable, and they're not the same from person to person. This is also established kind of talking about. For example, I'll give you an example of a testimony I gave in court in Chicago. I listened to one of these people that had standards within one of these organizations, talk about a spectrogram. Well, there were settings on the equipment was set wrong. And so what he was saying what a resonant frequency is actually the fundamental frequency of pitch. They would look at pitch patterns rather than format or resonant frequency patterns. It didn't make any difference what kind of standards he had. He wasn't doing the work right. I'm more interested in the work.
All right, speaking of that then, let's move to the work that you did on this case. Do I understand correctly? Let's categorize the two types of sound that you identified, the foreground and the background. The foreground being the obviously audible sounds, and the background being the sounds that were not readily
Right, and
audible.
most of the foreground sounds came, as was mentioned before, came from the 911 operator or the caller.
All right,
The sound did come from the man.
all right.
You have a question on that?
Well, I'm talking about when you play the recording through a set of speakers, you can hear somebody yelling or screaming. Do you agree?
During that first 45 seconds?
Correct.
Page number 3? Of course, yes.
Right. That's the speech I'm talking about.
The background speech. For the whole thing. Background speech.
Do I understand from your report that in addition to the sounds that are evident when you listen to the recording, you also have identified speech, but only through amplification, that's only through amplification, it's otherwise not audible.
So that's the point I have trouble with that last part of the phrase there. They are audible, but they are very, very low in level and require very careful listening. And they're very difficult to listen in real time. That's why we separate them out, we edit them out into listening pairs. In pairs.
Let's talk about how much speech that you were able to identify that is not masked or overlapped, but that you have a clear sample of the speaker. Were you able to do that?
I read the meaning of the text. Do I repeat for it, please?
Yes, let's talk about the speech that you were able to isolate that wasn't masked or overlapped with other speech that you could then consider for
Foreground speech or background?
the guy yelling. That speech.
That's what? That guy you got cut off there. I didn't hear the last word.
Do you hear somebody yelling for help on this recording?
One, there's the word help, I think.
The reality is that after analyzing this recording, you hear someone say help once, and that's all?
What? What are you talking about? I'm sorry, I'm another me. Different words on here. Some which are mentioned in the report.
All right, I'm sorry about the backup.
I'm begging you. How about I'm begging you? Or
Let's
get off of me. Or stop. Or
we'll get to those. We'll get to those soon. But I'm talking now about the audible speech of someone screaming, and whether you've been able to isolate that speech without masking and overlapping, so that you can use it to compare with for speaker identification.
yes. That way, but it's not a requirement that be non-overlapping because much of the speech that's on there, for example, the very first example, the beginning of tape number 3 or call number 3 has 3 people talking at once. That's not at all unusual on the tape of overlapping speakers.
Right, but for speaker identification, do you require speech masked or overlapped with other speech?
It depends on who's overlapping. If you have a child overlapping an adult male, that wouldn't be a big problem. Because their frequencies, their resonant frequencies would not overlap that much. If you had two women overlapping about the same age, that would be a problem probably. If they were,
Did you attempt
simultaneous at the time.
Did you attempt to isolate the unmasked non-overlapping speech for analysis? And how long was that speech altogether?
That's not a requirement to measure the overall length of the speech.
Did you do that?
I could do it, but I don't do it as no meaning to me.
So the standard that you talked about, for example, a 10-second minimum, or the BI that has a 16-second minimum, that's not a standard that you apply in your analysis for any length of time.
Many of the analyses that I do involve very long corpuses of speech, about 50 seconds, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. There's no hard and fast rule about it. And minimally, there's sufficient signal quality, it wouldn't make any difference to go below that standard and then analyze 4 seconds,
So
3 seconds.
is it your opinion that there was sufficient signal quality in this case for a reliable speaker identification?
I think there was sufficient quantity of signal to analyze, but it was not always of sufficient quality.
Let me ask you a couple of questions about the report itself and the methodology that you used. You point out that it was important to you and critical to your analysis, the 16-bit reporting,
Yes,
the 16-bit amplitude resolution.
amplitude resolution.
Why was that critical, and how does that affect your analysis?
Well, that's a very good question. The reason for that is that then divides the loudness scale, the amplitude scale, into a large number of increments. So that gives us an opportunity to have a much larger range from the loudest sound you can record to the softest sound you can record. So, for example, the 16 bits gives you a signal to noise ratio on the recording of about 95 dB. That's from the range from the loudest to the softest sound. Whereas an 8-bit recording might only give you 35 dB. There's a huge difference.
And
the reason for that,
that's critical to your analysis in this case, because if it, well, I'm asking you, why was that critical? What if you did not have 16-bit amplitude resolution in this case?
Well, that would have been much more difficult because the gradations of amplitude would be very large, and the signal would be very low in level. It would be very, very inadequate representation of the signal.
So that would,
because the signals are so far down, like the stop word, it sounds 30 decibels. If your signal noise ratio is only 35 decibels, that would be sitting literally in the noise floor.
so if you did not have this 16-bit amplitude resolution, you would be unable to be as confident in your findings?
I would say that would be true, yes. For certain tokens.
Mm-hmm. And how is it that you know that what you processed there was, in fact, 16-bit amplitude resolution?
I was told one.
How were you told and who told you?
I believe I was told by the Stanford Police Department, but I'm not sure.
Did you call the Stanford Police Department?
No, I don't think I called directly to the police department. I think I called 911 center.
So do you remember calling the 911 center and asking them about this issue?
I called about some recording it, I think so, yes.
The recording that you analyzed was the recording that was provided to you by the state attorney's office?
But a separate recording that was non-redacted.
Correct. So the state attorney was the source of that recording.
Yes, so the recording was essentially identical with the exception of the addresses and names we put back in. If you look at signals that were excerpts from Washington Post studies and what I did recently, they look identical.
Do you know that what you analyzed, do you know that what you analyzed was, in fact, the recording with 16-bit amplitude resolution from any other source than your conversation with the Sanford Police Department?
Well, I don't think I had very good information about the digital recording in general. That's typical these days. The signal is described. When I read the signal to a signal analysis program, it's all the characteristics of the signal, since they're digital, they're all list everything that's there. So when that's listed as part of the signal, is that what we call a header description of all the characteristics of the signal. It comes with the signal. And that's what I'm saying, that's what I call them about the 16 bits, because that's already in the description, the header.
In the description in the header of what?
Of the digital file. That's kind of what digital, how the digital file is saying, maybe we should have said it was helpful. All it is as a result of native beat converter. The voltage meter reads the signal X number of times per second and writes that number down on the computer. So that, for example, the signal this case was sampled at 8,000 samples per second. I mean that each time we have a second speed and being input to the computer, we have 8,000 numbers. Then those numbers are described in terms of signal characteristics. So along those numbers, there's a header file that tells you what the sampling rate was, the resolution was, and so on.
And all of that information is in the file itself that you got? Okay.
That's correct.
Another question about the specifics. You indicate in your report that, and I think in your testimony, that there were some speeds that you enhanced considerably using various techniques, including Sony SoundForge. Is that correct?
I use Sony SoundForge to enhance too. I did actually very little enhancement. Most of what I did was to differentially gain or amplify those very top segments. It didn't really require enhancement.
And
Very minimal enhancement.
you recognize then, though, that
reduction out as applied to a signal in general, tries to enhance everything. That's generally not very successful in the kind of data we're dealing with here. That wasn't at all successful in what I did.
so according to what you said here in your report, you didn't make the speech any better through those global
They weren't
enhancements.
involved. They weren't involved. They're not on any sample tape, on any demo tape, and they weren't involved in the speaker identification or the speech phonetic transcription. But that was something that I tried to do AHC, and the answer we couldn't.
Okay.
That wasn't done.
So speaking of enhancements and such, I know that you use your computer because you ran certain software that you've been talking about. But did you use a computer software program for purposes of speaker identification?
No, that would be automatic speech recognition.
Yes.
Speech-
Well, I'm not saying automatic speech recognition. I'm talking about computer software that's designed to identify the speaker.
Yeah, that's automatic speech recognition. Speaker recognition, if you wish. Call both.
Right. Are you familiar with that technology?
Of course, I taught it.
Do you have access to that technology?
I don't have access to it now because I'm not the academic field. I never used it forensic. It's relatively inappropriate for forensic use. Too rigid, not flexible enough. The kind of noise and distortion conditions we get in real life situations.
So although you would have this, this computer software available to you for speaker identification, you choose not to use it because you're not satisfied it's reliable?
It is reliable in forensic situations. A majority of the studies are not.
So, insofar as...
If you pull a bunch of people that try to dictate into their phone or dictate into their little tablet, see how successful they are. Some are successful with speaker recognition, some are not so successful. That's the answer.
So you wouldn't rely on it in rendering an opinion on speaker identification?
Not typically, no.
And you didn't in this case?
No.
So what I'd like you to help me with then is exactly what you did that resulted in you tentatively identifying speakers on this recording. And I know that you've not used the computer software approach. So you used the aural spectrogram, the spectrographic approach. Is that basically what you did?
Well, that would be the combined method. I used at least that, including some other more recent tests.
Well, I'm talking about...
Basic comparisons were being made orally, A-U-R-A-L, orally and spectrographically. It's not just spectrograph. Now we have computers, we're able to do many different acoustical tests as far as our spectrographic menu, if you will.
Did you isolate segments of speech that you wanted to listen to and then compare that speech with known speech to form an opinion whether it was or could be the same speaker?
Absolutely.
And do you have those pairs? Did you record those pairs?
I have thousands of them.
So you generated thousands of known
I have thousands of files. I don't know how many comparisons about that, but I have thousands of files that have signals on them.
Do you have discrete segments of speech that you compared with other known speech that you evaluated insofar as speaker identification?
Isn't that the same question?
Well, I'm asking you, do you have that, and can you identify specifically?
I have it. Yes, it's on the computer, yes.
Can you identify specifically for us those segments that you were able, in your mind, to compare successfully, that were suitable for comparison, and that you were able to compare?
I could have gone to the list, I'll send you a list.
All right, that would be very helpful. It may be here today, though, but if you go ahead and send it, that would be great.
It amplifies my answer to the question. The comment that some of the pairs involve enhancing the segment for example, the speech is particularly fast. Well, one of the things I did in some of the various practices was to slow down the speech. I didn't use that ultimately, but I looked at that.
Well,
I was looking at more than one type of pair of the same speech.
what does that method involve? What do you call that, and how does it work?
Well, in other words, a regular pair comparison, we have the unknown first typically, and the speech style interval is the half second, a second, then the signal, the exemplar. The exemplar could be processed in some way to make it match the loudness, to make it, always the case, this is study, or to match the overall duration of the speech, in other words, the speech rate, those kinds of things.
Did you do that here? Did you manipulate the speech in order to make it more like The unknown speech?
Just temporarily to see how it sounds like this. Do it on all calls.
All right, so that's your
If there's significant differences in speech rate, then I do it on most of them as a temporary procedure. It's not in the final pair comparison.
how does that then lead to the final pair comparison?
Because it tells us what influence speech rate had on a perception. For example, we also, this will tell you back a little bit thing, we also play the speech backwards. The reason we play the speech backwards is to emphasize voice quality, sexual quality of the speech without any meaning associated with it, without any words associated with it. So that's often a frequent tactic that we use.
Did you do that here?
Yes.
And did you apply that method to all of the speech that you've identified in this case?
Not all of the speech, but the ones for which was appropriate.
Well, did you apply that method to all of the speech that you have now identified in this case?
It is appropriate for all of the speech.
Did you apply that to all of the speaker identification that you did?
It is appropriate for all the speaker identifications.
What circumstances are you saying that it would be appropriate and when it would not?
Well, for example, it wouldn't be appropriate in the word top.
I didn't,
Let's see,
it would not be
the word
appropriate.
top. Certain kinds of sounds are what we call velocity dependent, meaning that the speed of your tongue movement and your lip movement affect the identification of the sound, and therefore change the meaning of the word. It's backwards or forward. It would alter the whole pattern. Sounds like the water sound might has a movement too. The love sound, they also might not be appropriate.
So you use this approach sound by sound?
Not sound by sound, typically syllable by syllable, or diphone by diphone.
I would still like to focus your attention, Dr. Wright, on here's what I'm trying to get at. I'm not doing a very good job, I apologize. There are certain cries, certain screams that are readily obvious when you play the recording. Do you agree with that?
Okay, so the screens are obvious what they're saying.
Utterances, sounds, clear, audible sounds.
And you can identify phonetically or just hearing sound.
I'm talking about discrete utterances that you can isolate. You may also claim to be able to identify spoken words, but at least it's a clear, discrete utterance.
You can answer this several times, so it's a yes.
Okay. And some of those words, some of those utterances you are able to ascribe speech to, words that you can identify.
Many.
And you have a transcript of that you're going to send us?
I answered that several times. We've done presently a complete transcript. It's in progress.
Okay, but that's one set. Then there's another group of speech that you are claiming to identify in your report that seems to be subtext. It seems to be underneath soft-spoken speech that's not in that first group. Am I correct?
Yes, I mean, it's not necessarily soft as what I come and call one.
The 911 call.
These questions we answer, we pose them. The only other speech that I was talking about in the report was the sight word speech that I was talking about.
Yes, I think maybe the sidebar speech would be the way you
Okay,
describe it.
that's on call number one. It's George's sidewalk street.
All right, before we get to that, I was referring to sidebar as being less audible speech than the voices that are screaming or crying out. Could
No, I
you,
was referring to sidebar as aside, someone talking to himself or talking to something, someone other than the principal listener.
and in that sense, you're saying there is speech that you've been able to find on the non-emergency call that's lower or underneath the obviously audible speech?
Yeah,
And what was your method for that?
Judge, I'm object at this point, we're now beyond, again, the scope of the Fry motion, as it relates to the reason I filed an objection.
Right. Well, Dr. Reich had indicated that he evaluated both call number 1 and 3. So I think we're on to the second call, and Mr. West is entitled to ask the questions regarding that call.
As long as, and I would simply ask if he's asking about that first non-emergency call, he referred to specifically mentioned
Well,
this such as call 1.
It may help, Mr. West, if you refer to those calls as Dr. Reich has put them, because it seems that there's miscommunication or misunderstanding as to which call you're talking about on his part. So perhaps if you used call 1 and call 3, he would be able to answer the questions.
Yes, and thank you. I'm the one that confused that. Dr. Wright, we're talking now about call 1,
good.
and you examined this, and you've found some speech on this recording that's not obviously audible when one listens to the recording.
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say that there are voice shifts that have shifted from softer speech to louder speech, from breathy speech to non-breathy speech to spasmodic speech, to harsh speech, so on. So there was sometimes it went down slow, but nowhere near as slow as the signal level, the background signal on call number 3.
So, keeping your attention on call number 1,
Yes.
are you saying that if one were to listen to this recording, even with good quality headphones, that they would be able to hear the speech that you referenced?
Well, that depends on the listener. For example, one of the phrases that, am I allowed to say one phrase on that?
Well, if you could identify where it is you believe there was speech, certainly we could go
Well,
from
I
there.
just I've been identified by others that speak. It has to do with these expletives. They always get away. You know what I'm talking about?
I do, although I don't.
These assholes, they always get away, but not on me.
Right, you have concluded that there is that statement, but not on me, as a result of applying a method to identifying speech.
Applying the standard methodology that's used in acoustic phonetics to identify speech, yes.
So are you saying?
First they have to be amplified.
So that was my question. If somebody just listens to this recording with good quality headphones, they're not going to hear that, are they?
They'll hear it if they lose the signal. That's one of the problems I have with courts and audio recording, that they don't give the jury a fair chance to listen to the signal. Experts don't listen to signals running in real time. They listen, in the old days, they listened with tape loops. Now we listen with segments on the computer. They have to give an opportunity to listen to the speech in short segments. And if you listen to the speech in short segments, with your earphones on, yes, you can hear it.
Short segments being segments that you have sort of extracted from this and then amplified?
Well, in this case, the segments are quite a bit longer than the segments on the call 3. There has to be a couple of phrases and a sentence.
Did you use any different methodology on analyzing this recording than you did on call 3?
Not for the word identification, no.
And how is it that you were able to actually identify the words that you believe were spoken as opposed to just being able to reveal sounds?
That's a good question. by listening to them and looking at the characteristics, what we call the acoustic features that go along to making up the sound. So to give you an example, make it easier for the chorus. For example, the S sound. If you want to produce the S sound, there are certain physiological features, certain acoustical features that must be met. Goals, Goals, goals that must be met. They include coming from the lungs, we call egress of airflow from the lungs. They include constriction in the oral cavity, preferably at the upper gum ridge. Sufficient constriction, these are all the features. Sufficient constriction at the gum ridge, the upper gum ridge, alveolar gum ridge, to airflow.
Okay.
The whole thing is, there's a set of about 30 different features that we look at, and then we determine whether or not that produces the correct kind of sound, given those physiological features.
And then you listen, and then you try to figure out what words were spoken?
Not just listen, look for these features, 25 or 30 features.
All right, so what we're talking about in your report is your attempt to arrive at a trustworthy and stable transcription. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right, which means that once you process this, then you should have a trustworthy and stable transcription.
For the signals that were of sufficient quality after enhancement to yield that kind of analysis, yes.
Well, are those signals appropriate, the ones on call 1 that we've been talking about?
No, most of them are, but there's a one section after the section has to do with he's running. They explain the section. He says the Zimmerman is running.
I remember the section. I don't see that in the reporting, though. I'm sorry. I don't see that. I don't see that in the report. What I want to.
I give you an answer to the question, but I am not going to know the question.
What I want to focus your attention on is when you prepared a preliminary report, including a transcript of some of these statements that you heard on that call 1, and then you prepared your second report that you provided to the state attorney's office in May of this year, the transcript changed.
Right.
And the transcript changed on the report from what you told us in our partial deposition a couple of weeks ago. And I thought that once...
You can be more specific about the thing?
Yes, give me just a second. I'm looking at the report. It's not dated, but it was when you said you prepared in connection with the work for the Washington Post. And on the second page, in the second full paragraph, do you have that available?
Not readily. I can pull it on the computer. I trust you. Tell me.
All right, well, I'll read this sentence for you. You're talking about call 1 and the words that precede and then follow that reference, these assholes always get away. You see what I'm talking? Okay. In the first report, you say that you hear the words, dear, dear, dear God, followed by a whisper, you can count, yep, on me. Whereas in your newer report, you say, only dear God, and then you say is followed, but not on me. So your transcript changed, and I'm trying to understand.
You know, the middle section, you got the middle section, the asshole section. That was the same.
Does it take a speech scientist to hear the words these assholes always get away?
Well, I think so, because there were thousands of people who thought they were racist slur. More than thousands. Maybe millions. That was a bonus contention. That's the reason why I analyzed that section.
You know, you mentioned that at the very beginning, that you took an interest in the case because you'd seen a lot of internet discussion about the recordings. Is that right?
About specific transcription of the recordings and what they meant in terms of politics and so on.
And that you decided at that point to take this on yourself to do some work?
Just to explore it, and think whether or not what all the emotion was about.
Did you begin to do an analysis with that in mind?
Yes.
And did
With
you?
that in mind, means that I wanted to get an accurate transcription of certain areas of the tape.
All right. And
Some which I still can't get.
so did you do this independently or at the request of the newspaper?
Not before the
And then did you
We're sorry for the newspaper, and as I'm going to the present day.
did you contact the newspaper to tell them you were working on this?
No.
How were you contacted?
They were recommended to me, referred to me by Jim Carino, C-A-R-I-N-O, the president of Intelnet.
So did you work out an agreement for them to do some additional work for some compensation?
I call it seed money. It was a very minimal amount.
You said tease money?
Seed.
Seed money. Thank you.
Plant the seed.
Mm-hmm. And how much money did you receive from the Washington Post?
2,000.
And about how much time had you invested in the case by the time you submitted this report to the Washington Post?
Hundreds of hours. Several hundred.
Several hundred hours up to the point that you gave the Washington Post this report.
That's correct.
And that was when, please?
I think May, I'm not sure. May 2012.
Okay. And then when you were contacted by the state attorney's office, is that how it happened? Someone from the state attorney called you?
I think so, yeah.
And when was that?
I think that was early, soon after the Washington Post report.
And did you?
Within 3 or 4 weeks of the report.
So probably June of 2012?
That sounds right.
And did you provide the
I have
state?
to look it up. I'm not.
Did you?
I'm sorry.
Did you provide the state attorney with the report you had prepared for the Washington Post?
With a redacted version, yes.
All right. And then did they hire you to do more work on the case?
They did.
And what are your financial arrangements with them? And how many hours have you worked on their behalf in this case?
I'm not sure.
Well, can you ballpark it?
Hundreds.
100 or 200 or 300?
I haven't added it up.
Can you come anywhere close?
I work by the hour. I can't tell you. I haven't added it up.
You don't keep time records?
I do. I haven't added it up.
Have you sent them any bills?
You got a retainer from them.
How much was that?
I believe the retainer was 7,500.
Okay. And what's your hourly rate?
$100 an hour. I'm a bargain.
So approximately how many hundreds of hours have you worked on this case up through today?
Excuse me, my chair broke. Yeah, I would say between 500 and 700 and get it.
Could it be even more than 700?
It could very well be. There's airplane crashes that we've been working on for 20 years.
Mm-hmm. So it might even be 700 or 800 or even 1,000 hours that you put in this.
I don't think it's 1,000. It's irrelevant anyway. There's a high number of hours of this kind of thing.
So let's use a round number, let's say you have 700 hours. 700 hours in the case. 700 hours in the case would be about $70,000, is that correct?
Yes.
So that's,
I built all of it.
well, why wouldn't you bill all of it? Are you not expecting to be paid for your time?
I guess that's an academic thing. We are lowering ourselves.
Well, are you doing them a favor? Have you agreed to discount it if they use you?
No. Because they what?
Have you agreed to discount your rate if they call you as a witness?
No. I haven't agreed to discount anything. But often on jobs that involve very extensive transcription work, that's where the time we're talking about in the transcription. I frequently discount the transcription work.
When do you,
It's so time consuming, and otherwise I wouldn't get the work.
when do you expect to finish the transcription work in this case?
Sometime in the next couple of weeks.
And how many more hours do you think it's going to take you to do that?
I have no idea. Only God knows.
Between now and then, you may be able to identify additional speech.
I think a little bit, but that's some, but not a whole lot. It's in a final transcript mode. In one section, as I told you, where in call number 1, he says he's running. That section involves a tremendously distorted section. It lasts about half a page, 3/4 of a page. That probably is not going to change. Probably going to be mostly unintelligible.
Do you have any speech that you've identified in that section of call 1?
The section where he's running?
Yes.
Yes.
And that's not in your report?
No, it's not in my report.
And when would that transcript be available?
Saying down as I was talking about. But much of the speech that students have there so far is the square package, which on my transcript means as the best interpretation. Or it's accurate, which means that it's unintelligible. You know, the joint checks on the single transcript, it's got a lot of missing stuff, missing information. In fact, I'm not even sure what it is. We can't agree on what the distortion is. Sounds like closed noise mixed in with the distortion of a cell phone. Like the cell phone is being bent. The circuit board of the cell phone, smartphone probably, was being bent while he was running. Pressure of his chest against the screen that distorted the signal.
Did you reference
Good in mind.
Did you reference any of this in either of your reports?
No, we just discovered it.
So really, that's ongoing work that, I'm sorry, I have no idea what you just said. Are you saying that you've now done it?
So, Your Honor, again, beyond the scope of speaker identification,
Okay.
it's
not just speaker identification.
This is a Fry hearing.
Yes, but that includes the speech identification, speech recognition as well, that this witness claims to be able to identify on both calls. That's part of this Fry proceeding as well, whether this witness is able
Fry
to do
proceeding is first and foremost to determine whether or not the methodologies used were new and novel.
that. Yes, and if those methods can be applied to the facts of the case in a reasonably reliable way, basically, whether it's within the standards accepted by the relevant scientific community.
Okay. I'm going to sustain the objection.
Well, I would ask the court to reserve, and I won't ask further until we at least get the rest of the report.
Well, you can't ask him any more questions on something that hasn't been provided, so
Yes.
of course I'll reserve onto that.
So, on On how you got involved in this, you got interested because of internet stuff. Did you take the context of what was being said and happened into account when you did your work?
I think the context, emotional context, linguistic context, no context.
The factual context of what evidence was in the newspaper or in the media about what was supposed to happen.
I wasn't interested, I was interested in the data, in the recording. Superficial way, maybe.
Did you take into account any of the facts that had been in the media in evaluating the speech or the speaker identification?
Well, I knew that it wasn't niggers, but it was assholes.
You're talking about what? Some reference to call 3?
Well, one,
Call 1, I'm sorry.
those assholes, they're away.
Right.
Those niggers, that was understanding one.
Who told you that? I've never seen that anywhere.
It was all over the internet.
But you established conclusively that's not what was said.
Absolutely.
So, for example, Dr. Wright, were you aware that there was a witness who saw George Zimmerman?
The counsel testifying about what any witness might have said. You can ask if the doctor was aware of anything or what the doctor was aware of, but I would object to him testifying.
Well, this is cross-examination. Overruled.
Dr. Wright, were you aware that there was a witness who testified that he saw part of the altercation and that he saw Trayvon Martin straddling George Zimmerman, striking him, and that George Zimmerman was crying for help? Did you know that?
Yes, sir.
Witnesses have said that many things.
Well, did you take that into account in trying to identify
I
the
didn't take that
speakers?
specific interest into account because they didn't take any witnesses into account. I was interested in witnesses. I was interested in what they, I was interested in what the recordings told me.
Did you take into account the injuries to George Zimmerman, that he'd been punched in the
I
nose?
took into account the acoustic patterns and oral patterns that were on the recording. That's what I was asking you. That's what I did.
Do you think that being punched in the nose might affect nasality, for example?
It could.
Did you take that into account?
There was no evidence of that on the recording.
So there was no measurement you could make of nasality?
Although the next I could make of nasality, there's no evidence of any major nasality in this case. The nasality or hyponasality effect.
Okay, I have one moment.
Yes,
That
sir.
doesn't mean it couldn't have been there in between, senses or whatever.
No, I'm sorry, Dr. Wright, we stepped away from the speakerphone for a moment. The analysis that you did on call 3, you have, as a result of the oral spectrographic analysis, you have identified speakers being George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin, is that correct?
Correct.
You've also recognized that there was a
And that could be
tentatively then. Is there anything else that you could do with this, the information that you have, that you could reach a definitive opinion?
No.
So did you also, of course, heard the 911 operator and the person talking on the phone, correct?
You know that second, or what are we talking about?
I'm talking about as you reviewed the 911 call, you
The
heard
whole call?
you heard the 911 operator, correct?
Okay.
You heard the person, the female who made the call,
Okay.
and you may have heard a sound of someone in the unit with her.
Jeremy.
And did you hear any other voices on the recording?
The other person who was mentioned in my report was Jeremy.
We're going to ask, Doctor, that you not identify anyone by name other than Mr. Martin.
I identified my name on the tape.
So what I'm looking at then, other than the people that you've identified, the male speaker that you've now said is Jeremy, the female who placed the call, the 911 operator, and Mr. Martin and Mr. Zimmerman, have you heard any other voices on that recording?
It's a little bit.
Was that a no?
Could you repeat your answer?
I need the question re-posed.
The people that have been identified as being on the recording include George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin, the female who placed the call, the person you identified as Jeremy, and the 911 operator, correct? Okay.
Yes.
Other than those individuals, did you identify any other speakers on the recording?
No. Not in the first 35 seconds. The first 60 seconds.
Right, we're limiting it to the first 45 seconds.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Manti, any redirect?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Wright, we're finished. We're finished and we're going to hang up the phone. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Oh, I may want to keep it up there. Okay, so it's scheduling. It's 4:38. Do you want to start with another witness now, or do you want to come in tomorrow morning?
Judge, that will conclude the presentation on behalf of the state. So.
Okay. Mr. West, do you want to call another witness now or come in the morning?
May I have just a moment?
Yes,
Thank
you may.
Judge. To confer with Mr. Manti?
Yes, you may.
Thank you.
They all say it's George Zimmerman in one fashion or another. Against the screams, okay, they say it's not. It's a no-go, and it's only a 33% matching against the screams.
The words that were at a scream level were almost entirely those of Trayvon Martin.
Now, I understand your report to say that that conclusion is a tentative one.
Yes, very.
I'm the chairman of that committee. There's also a group at the American College. I want help. And he said that a number of times. And I use that as a basis.
And in a nutshell, without directly quoting it, could you?
And I did a little enhancement on it.
One pending motion regarding the motion to compel that we.
Good morning, Mr. Rowan.
Let me ask you this, just in general. There was an awful lot of reference about, are you familiar with studies that say this, and are you familiar with studies that say that?
Review, you may want to, sampling is a lot longer, you'll note that there are trail emails, so that you'll see the same email, then it gets responded to, then we responded, but you'll get flavor, which I think is similar to what you just.
Okay, and these are emails with,
Wayman, James, Wayman, W-A-Y-M-A-N.
thank you.
They all say it's George Zimmerman in one fashion or another. Against the screams, okay, they say it's not. It's a no-go, and it's only a 33% matching against the screams. They all say it's George Zimmerman in one fashion or another. Against the screams, okay, they say it's not. It's a no-go, and it's only a 33% matching against the screams.
The words that were at a scream level were almost entirely those of Trayvon Martin.
Now, I understand your report to say that that conclusion is a tentative one.
Yes, very.
I'm the chairman of that committee. There's also a group at the American College. I want help. And he said that a number of times. And I use that as a basis.
And in a nutshell, without directly quoting it, could you?
And I did a little enhancement on it.
One pending motion